Good evening. Question is, would you please define what is called the subconscious? The subconscious is not a term that is used in mystical literature, and it belongs entirely to the realm of psychology. And therefore, I would not feel qualified to define their terms. We do not have such a term in our work, nor does it appear in spiritual or mystical work. Certainly it applies only to the realm of the human. Is it not cruel or wrong to kill beasts, birds, and fish for human food? I can't answer whether it's wrong or not. Certainly seems cruel. And I'm sure that the day will come when it will prove unnecessary. The eating of meat is, of course, a hangover from those days, 150 to 200 years ago, when meat and fish, birds, comprised almost the whole of man's menu, because there was so little known of agriculture, and except for a few basic products, the natives of all continents and all islands naturally sought their food, not by growing it, because they were mostly nomadic tribes, but by catching it wherever they were. And of course we are just a very, very short way out from that state of consciousness. And therefore, we haven't learned to completely do away with it. To begin with, it could be done away with, the eating of flesh, in private homes. But that involves a study. It should not be undertaken lightly. For this reason, at our present state of unfoldment, we have made the body accustomed to these particular foods. And to deprive ourselves of them now, without knowing how to substitute other foods, just brings about more problems than those we already have. It is very much along another line, also having to do with foods. I'm sure there must be some of you who know that 75% at least of all the diseases of the body could be eliminated merely by proper nutrition. In other words, at least 75% of all the diseases of mankind are caused by wrong habits of eating. Now, I'm speaking completely on the human plane. And it is for this reason that those on the human plane can not only rid themselves of disease, they can rid themselves of the ravages of age merely by changing their eating habits. I will give you an illustration and point. In our Masonic bodies in New York State, it was decided about 20 years ago that a fund would be raised every year, contributed by all of the Masons of the state, to provide research into this very subject of geriatrics, that of age, and how to prevent it. When this research body made its first report about 2 years ago, this is what it said. When this research was undertaken, the average age of death in the old folks' Masonic homes throughout the country, and that was from Maine to California, was about 72 years of age. Now, after, I think it was 8 years of this research, it was 82 years of age. But whereas they had formerly died old men and women at 72, they were now at 80, not old men and women. And they said that this entire change was brought about by only two things. One, providing some pleasant occupation for those who lived in the homes, and number two, changing the food they ate. Now, you might say, how did they change the food they ate? Well, for one thing, they took away all white flour, all white sugar. They took away all boxed cereals. They took away all of the things that most people buy in their supermarkets. And they substituted for those whole grain cereals, whole grain breads, whole grain cakes, whole grain pancakes and hot cakes. They took away from them white rice and gave them the natural rice. They took away white sugar and gave them natural sugar, brown sugar. And they took away fried foods and all of the things that most of you, I'm sure, women especially, know are absolutely not foods at all. They're merely bulk that you place in the stomach because they're a little cheaper or easier to get than going out to the health food stores. Now, all of this on the human plane. But remember that it does explain why the human race is filled with diseases that we are trying to heal spiritually, while they themselves, after you heal them, go about contracting again by going right back to their old eating habits. Now, it is in the same way that those who know how to eat can do far better with their bodies without meat, without fish, far better. They can have healthier bodies and stronger bodies. But they really must know something about nutrition, how to prepare a salad or how to fix their cheese and what, so forth and so on. So that eventually, with this higher knowledge of nutrition that is just now coming into human awareness, you're going to find that just physically, the world is going to be better off with less disease and less signs of age. And as they get to the place where they can do away with flesh eating, they will find themselves still better off. Now, as you can see, this has to do entirely with the human level of life. But I have noticed this. As students come into higher and higher awareness of spiritual consciousness, they eat less of meat, less of flesh, and they find it impossible to eat many of these grocery store foods or supermarket foods and begin to be more choosy in the selection of pure food. In other words, just as an individual coming to the spiritual path eventually loses the ability to use profanity, obscenity, just as they get to a place where vulgarity is distasteful to them and is no part of their consciousness, so it is that the grosser foods lack their charm and begin to fall away. And so it is that in every way a person, as they become more and more spiritually enlightened, become less and less gross in every form of their life. In our work, in which we do not believe that you can get into heaven by changing your humanhood, but only by attaining spiritual consciousness, we never recommend to any student what they shall eat or what they shall drink. Rather, centering all attention on acquiring spiritual consciousness and letting their own spiritual consciousness change their habits of living. In the same way, we never ask a person to stop smoking or to stop drinking or to stop card playing, although I'm sure you know that these have no place whatsoever in spiritual living. And yet, as students go on into higher and deeper realms of consciousness, they find all those things dropping away from them normally and naturally, which is as it should be, because otherwise you are dealing with repression. And when you deal with repression, you sometimes make situations worse than they were before. Did Jesus walk on the water? Or did the Red Sea open for Moses? Did Elijah awake to find cakes baked on the stones in front of him? And the answer is that you can only accept an answer in proportion to your own spiritual development, because you cannot accept something higher than your own state of consciousness. I don't know whether Jesus walked on the water, but I do know that it is possible to walk on the water. I do not know if the Red Sea opened for Moses literally, but I do know that it can. I do not know whether cakes were baked on the stones in front of Elijah, but I know that it can take place, and I also know that all of these things have taken place. Now this brings us to, well, let us call it just this point. Nothing is impossible. Everything may be impossible to you or me, but nothing is impossible. And the reason is that God is the doer, not you and not me. As long as it would depend on you or me to walk on the water, I'm sure it could not be done. As long as it would depend on you or me to make manna fall from the sky, I do not believe that it could be done. But this I know, that when we rise to certain states of consciousness, things transpire through us that could never happen on the human level of consciousness. This is an experience that actually happened in the home of one of our students. It is a home of means. But the husband, not being interested in the spiritual teaching, it was necessary for the wife to get from her husband whatever monies she needed for any spiritual purpose, whether it was the buying of books or going to classes or anything else that she wanted. She had to go to her husband. He had no objection to this, but she had the feeling that this really should be her demonstration, not his demonstration. And an experience came in their home for which she was very grateful. And one day, she sat down to meditate, And remember, there's no one else in that home but herself and her husband and the help. And she thought, I must give an expression of gratitude more commensurate with this experience. And I certainly don't feel that I want my husband to pay for it. This must take place through my own consciousness. And she dismissed it with that. A few days later, she went to her handkerchief case, where never in her life had she placed any money, and she found in there the exact sum that she had decided on as the gift that she wanted to make, and all in American currency. Well, she hadn't placed it there, and so she spoke to her husband to ask if he had placed any money in her drawer, and he said, certainly not. Anytime he wanted to give her money, he would gladly give it to her, not hide it in her handkerchief case. Now, I would not be able to remember how many times we have had stories brought to us of students who found money in their pockets, or students who had experiences of what you would call the supernatural phenomena, such as I've just described. Some of it you might discount. Knowing the people involved, it is impossible to discount all of it. In the same way, as you watch the healing works, you see things sometimes that you would no more want to tell another than you would want to try to fly without wings, because it comes absolutely in the realm of the ridiculous as far as the human mind is concerned. And let me tell you of a couple of these. A man who formerly played in a symphony orchestra became deaf and was no longer able to hear. When he was examined, he was told by ear specialists that his eardrums had wasted away and that he had no eardrums. And one day, he was sitting on a beach when a member of his family, who was a spiritual student, wrote a note to him and said, why don't you turn to the Spirit for help, for you surely could receive it? And he spoke to her and said, then heal me. You've been a student a long time. Heal me. And she went into meditation, and instantly he heard. And from that day to this, that man hears, and yet the doctors insist that he has no eardrums. But he hears. Now, I have a student who was the young bride of a young man. His mother was one of our students. And she was a surgical nurse, working with doctors in the surgery. And she went blind. The cause, I don't know. But she was eventually declared permanently blind and received her blind allotment from the government. In the course of time, she became interested in this work and wrote asking for help. And it was a very short time afterward that she saw everything clearly. She went back to the hospital, applied for her job, and was given her job. And she went into the surgery again as a surgical nurse. But twice a year, these nurses have to submit to physical examinations. And at the time of this physical examination, when they were testing her eyes, the doctor said to her, "Why, child, you're blind. You can't see a thing." Well, she says, I can see everything and I can read everything. Oh, he says, "You've memorized the chart, that's all." But she says, "I'm working in the surgery and I see everything." "Oh, no, you've just memorized." "Oh, that's an impossibility." Oh, she said, "I can see perfectly." And she went on to prove to him that she could. But he said, "In spite of that, I don't believe it, and I'm not going to permit you to go back." And he didn't. She was discharged. But soon after that, her husband was transferred to another city. She made application in a hospital there. To this very day, she is acting as surgery nurse, in spite of the fact that they say she cannot see a thing and is blind. And I have one more such case to tell you, and that is of the very first woman whom I taught and placed in the practice. She had a daughter who at 5 years of age sneezed and broke both cords of the eyes, or the cords of both eyes, and was blinded. Within a year, her eyes disappeared entirely. They, what would you call it, dissolved into dust and just blew away, so that there was only 2 empty sockets. I was in the family as practitioner to both the mother and the father. And one day, the mother said, "Don't you think that this child's eyes could be restored, that her sight could be restored?" And I said, "Frankly, I couldn't tell you. I'm not far enough along to know whether someone living could do it. But it would be worth experimenting with. And if you'd like, I'd take the case, but on one condition. Don't hurry me, don't nag me, and don't give me any money. Don't put me under any feeling that I'm working hopelessly or against time or money. Just leave it with me to work with as my own unfoldment takes place, and let's see what does happen." And 11 months later, the child opened her eyes and had 2 brand new eyes, and still has. Now, I can say all of these things to you for only one reason. That those of you who have been through class before or have heard my tapes, you know that I make no claim to any healing power. I don't believe that anyone has healing power. I believe definitely that when we attain the consciousness of the non-power of that which is claiming to have power and reality, that healings take place, not by virtue of us, but by virtue of that fourth dimensional consciousness which is there. And so it is that I can speak absolutely impersonally about these healings, knowing that anyone who attains any measure of this fourth dimensional consciousness can do the same. In 1921, I was given 3 months to live. I had what is even to this day known as an incurable disease, galloping consumption. There never has been a cure found for it, and the doctors told me that the most I could hope for was 3 months. And so I decided that since I had to remain in business to keep it together and preserve its assets for my family, that I would keep on with my work since there was no medical hope in any event, but that I would seek help from a Christian Science practitioner, which I did. And in 3 months, I was completely healed. Now, a couple of years ago, when telling this, somebody doubted it so positively that they were willing to bet everything they had that it was a wrong diagnosis and that I had never had such a thing, and if I had, couldn't be cured. And I agreed to submit to X-ray examination. And the X-ray examination reported this, that I have only one lung, but that I have a wall of muscle around where the other lung should be. And that this wall is my lung. And where did it come from? And how did it get there? Only after submitting to spiritual treatment. And so there you have it, that if this spiritual treatment can produce something that operates in place of a lung, if it can produce new eyes, if it can produce new flesh, tell me, why can't it produce any of these miracles of grace? Manna falling from the sky, the Red Sea opening. Because this we learn in the practice. Transcendental consciousness governs every effect. You can even make an automobile run without gasoline if you are sitting there in transcendental consciousness. Pilots have flown when their planes weren't functioning. Anything and everything can take place, not by your understanding or mine, but by the grace of God. Because when that grace of God or transcendental consciousness is functioning, it governs everything in the physical, mental, moral, financial realm. And so it is that the little that I know about the human history of Jesus does not indicate that he walked on the water literally, but if he actually was as high in consciousness as we have reason to believe, he certainly could do it, because it is not an impossibility, nor is it an impossibility for food to appear, or clothing to appear, or any other phenomena of nature. Because in the last analysis you will find that all phenomena is governed by the fourth dimensional consciousness. Therefore, it is only necessary that we rise into that consciousness where it can take place, because on the human level we can't grow new eyes. On the human level, we can't make miracles. We can't bring rabbits out of hats. On the human level, we cannot do any of these miracles. It is only if we transcend the human into a state of consciousness which is divine, fourth dimensional, spiritual, then anything is possible, because anything is possible to God. Do you think it's strange that God could set a table before you in the wilderness? Do you think it's strange that God could have water coming out of rocks? No. In our inner circle, we have witnessed many miracles, and since we're on that subject, let me tell you a few. There was a place in Florida where it had rained continuously for 18 months. Business was at a standstill. Merchants were going bankrupt. Real estate was at a complete standstill. Crops couldn't produce. And this whole area was in a very, very bad economical condition. The cause of this rain was a cloud formation which was hanging over Bermuda, but in such a way that the rain fell into Florida and into this one particular county. Weather bureaus were insistent the rain couldn't stop until this cloud formation dispersed, and it didn't seem willing to disperse. And so one night, two students, man and wife, of the Infinite Way, who lived in that particular city that was so hard hit, decided it was time that they try spiritual means. And so they telephoned from Florida out to Hawaii, which is probably 6,000 or 7,000 miles, and told us this story and said, will you help us and see if this cannot be made to stop? And at the time that the telephone call came, my 10 top students were in my living room, where we were having a meeting on this very subject of experimenting with the phenomena of nature. And so I said, well, we are ideally situated to try. So we will begin this instant. I went out into the living room, told them this, we sat there and we worked. Four hours later, they telephoned to us, the rain stopped. But the Weather Bureau announced over the radio that they must not expect it to stop permanently. It will start again in a few hours because this same cloud formation is over Bermuda. But it hasn't started since then. They've had nothing but their normal, natural rain from then on. And sometime later, quite a long time later, that cloud formation dispersed. Now one night, we were aroused at 1 a.m. with an alarm to warn us of a tidal wave. The tidal wave was to strike the center of our island at 6 a.m. It was coming toward us at the rate of 120 miles an hour. And at that rate, it should strike about 6 o'clock in the morning, and everybody who lived within a block or two of the beach was moved back out of the danger zone. I telephoned to our little group, and we worked, and nothing happened at 6 o'clock in the morning, but we were told that it would happen 6 o'clock in the evening. And at 6 o'clock in the evening, they decided that it would strike by midnight, and therefore all schools were ordered closed in the island for the next day because there would be no way of the children getting to school after this serious tidal wave. It didn't happen at midnight, and it didn't happen the next morning, but that night it was announced that it was only 1 hour away, and it would strike not the center of the island, but to the right of the island. The tip end of the right side of the island would catch it. Well, I must tell you this, it never struck, but it passed by 175 miles away from the furthest point in the island, where nothing was touched, not even shipping was there. That was our number one experiment with that, until the following year, again, warning, and this time we were to be struck at 1 a.m., and one of our students has a son who is a pilot with a Hawaiian Airlines, and it was his function to be in touch with the Rear Admiral of the Coast Guard, who was in charge of these warnings and so forth, and of rescue operations, on account of the flights of the Hawaiian Airlines. Well, now, again, our group was at work. At 12 o'clock, the Admiral said that it would strike positively by 1. 12:15, it was still going to strike at 1. 12:30, it was going to strike by 1. And at 12:45, the Admiral announced, we've lost it, and we can't find it. And it hasn't been discovered yet. And so Sammy insists that I am responsible for their having a holiday from school that wasn't on the agenda, for which he's very grateful. Now, we are continuing this type of work with any type of storm, with any type of, you might call it, natural phenomena. That is, unnatural phenomena of nature. And why do we call it a storm unnatural? For the simple reason that God has never created anything destructive to God's universe. Therefore, a storm must be man-made. Therefore, it must be a product of the carnal mind. But the carnal mind is a belief in two powers, whereas the truth is God is infinite. Therefore, God is the only power. And in the light of the knowing of this truth, nothing else can have power. All claim of power must be dissolved. Well, it has been dissolved in diseases. It has been dissolved in sins. It has been dissolved in insects that attack plants and so forth. One of my works some years ago was with the Department of Agriculture in Florida when a disease struck their milk cows and rendered the milk impossible for use, and they had to slaughter the cows for beef at a terrific loss of price. They couldn't find a remedy for it, and we were called, and in just one day, every single trace disappeared. The cows were normal, and except for one day, a year later, it has never returned. One day, a year later, it did return. They called for help, and again, it has never appeared. So we have witnessed infection dissolved, contagion dissolved, weather dissolved, anything that has its origin in a belief in two powers. And the reason you must clearly understand, God has no pleasure in your dying. Then God has made no provision for your death. Then such a thing as a storm, an infection, a contagion, age, all of the things that lead to death cannot be a part of God's creation. Otherwise, God would have provided for our death. It is strange that even in Christian churches, they accept the Hebrew Testament's 70 years and 10, which is absolutely nonsensical in the face of a master who said, I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have life more abundantly. I am come to heal the sick, raise the dead. Where then, if this is true, where is a provision for a power of sin, disease, death, storm, infection, contagion? Where does it come from? And when you work in this field as an active practitioner, you must eventually come to the conclusion that I have come to, and that is wherever there is a belief in two powers, it must externalize itself in conditions of both good and evil. And it is for this reason that human good is not spiritual, because it can be changed to human evil. Health isn't spiritual because it can quickly change to disease. Human life isn't spiritual because it can turn to death. And so it is only when your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. In other words, when you rise to a place in consciousness where you do not have a pair of opposites, where you do not have God contending against the devil, where you do not have immortal mind contending against mortal mind, where you do not have any form of a God power doing something to some form of an evil power, and can live and move and have your being in thy grace is my sufficiency in all things. I am not giving power to anything that has form. I am not giving power to that which I can see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. All power is vested in the invisible, the spiritual. When you do that, you find that even if you start with the milder forms of error, that gradually they disappear, and this gives you courage to go on to some what appears to be the more serious. In the end, you learn that the more serious is no more serious than the simplest, because they both have their foundation in a belief in two powers. Once you rise above the belief in two powers, you've healed it, whether it's a simple little pimple or a great big cancer, or whether it is a form of sin, false appetite, or whatever it may be. Now, even on the human plane, we are beginning to witness that. In your papers today is the story of a new discovery that with just one pill heals alcoholism. Now, you wouldn't believe that alcoholism was that easy to heal, would you? But if it's true that it can be healed with a pill, it wasn't as much of a power as we thought it was. Either that or they're giving dynamite for it. Eventually, it will be witnessed because of our spiritual and metaphysical work. It will be witnessed that the sins and the diseases, the lacks and the limitations were only operating as power because the universal human mind gave consent to them as power, and we individually had to pick up whatever was a part of universal belief. So never doubt miracles at any level, except don't believe that a man or woman can perform a miracle. But miracles can be performed through the consciousness of individuals. I of my own self can do nothing, but the Father within me can do anything and everything, because it is only required to do one thing: dissolve the belief in two powers. Dissolve the universal belief in two powers. And one with God is a majority. One person with a healing consciousness can heal thousands. 10 righteous men in a city can save the whole city. Why? Because it is the men. 2 or more gathered together in my name can perform miracles. Why? It isn't the 2. It is the attainment of some measure of spiritual consciousness. And the attainment of that is our goal in the infinite way. Our goal is not working miracles. Our goal is the attainment of that mind which was also in Christ Jesus. Then it performs its miracle works. Some years ago, you couldn't have gotten an infinite way book into seminaries. You couldn't even get them in many libraries. And today, all libraries accept them, or practically all, and practically all seminaries accept them. And just last week, the girl who edits my writings, prepares the manuscripts for publication, was lecturing in Washington, D.C. And after the lecture, one of the men students went home in a bus and found himself seated next to a Roman Catholic priest. And they got talking about religion, and this man explained that he was following the infinite way. Had the priest ever heard of Joel Goldsmith? Oh, he says, yes, I read his books. Says, we have them in the library. So nothing's impossible. The infinite way can get around like that. And be assured of this, a man couldn't get them around. Don't ever believe that any of us have the power to do it. You would have to witness how these miracles take place. You know, some years ago, when The Art of Meditation was first published in the United States, none of our books had ever been accepted by the Protestant Church, and none were ever found for sale in a Protestant church, probably unknown. But what happened? There was a man who was an editor of the second largest newspaper in the United States, and he was a Quaker, and he didn't believe in metaphysical or spiritual healing, but he received the book, The Art of Meditation, and he did believe in meditation as a Quaker, so he wrote a review of the book of his own free will and accord. But evidently, he hadn't written it at all. Evidently, God was on the scene, because the man who chooses all of the books, the recommended reading for the Protestant churches in the United States and Canada, was making up his list for that year of recommended books for Protestants of all denominations, and lo and behold, the first book on the list is The Art of Meditation. Now we find it in Protestant churches in the United States, and what does Canada do? The United Church of Canada accepts it as a recommended book and places an ad in their nationwide magazine advertising our Art of Meditation. And in this way, the first book is to be found in the bookstalls of Protestant churches, in the Methodist bookshop, in the Baptist bookshops. Heaven knows where you would never expect to find such a thing as an Infinite Way book. And then when Practicing the Presence came out, naturally, if the other one had been recommended, why, this one must be all right. So that one went in. That one had a list of the other writings of the Infinite Way, so they must be tried. And now I cannot tell you how many churches have prayer groups studying the Infinite Way writings and preparing their groups to heal with the Infinite Way methods. Think of this, and then ask yourself if you believe that man could do that. And you know the answer. No human being could break through. No human being could break through anything of that nature. It never has been done before. But with God, all things are possible, and there is no place now where the Infinite Way writings are not to be found, certainly if one looks at all. And so I say to you, don't ever believe that there are no miracles or that miracles are impossible. I suppose the outstanding miracle of the Infinite Way experience, or certainly one of them, is the fact that from England some of the Infinite Way books went to South Africa. And in the course of time, I must have had letters from about 15 students in South Africa who had found the writings and were reading them. And then one day, I'm sure it must have been God, but it seemed to be a man, wrote me a letter and said, when you're on your European trips, why don't you come to South Africa? Well, I didn't have any reason except that it was 10,000 miles away, and it seems far to go to see 15 people. But when I was over in the air office arranging my ticket, I said, if I went to London and wanted to come back to Hawaii and stop off in South Africa, could I do it? Oh, certainly you could do it. You'd only have to go about 15,000 miles out of the way? Well, how much would it cost? Well, the ticket would cost about $1,500, probably 700, 800 pounds more than otherwise. Well, that's not very much. And traveling expenses in the hotel. Well, make up my ticket that way. Now, that sounds ridiculous itself, doesn't it? It really happened. But when I left Hawaii for London by way of New York, when I reached New York, I found a letter from our book department, and it said, "What shall I do with this letter?" It was from a bookshop in Cape Town, South Africa, ordering 200 copies of each title. And I said, well, they probably think I'm Billy Graham. They've heard I'm coming, and they think I'm coming with a brass band. So just send them 20 copies each and tell them that I'm not coming with a brass band, and nobody's going to know that I'm there except these 15 people or so who have my books. I got to London, and one night the telephone bell rang, and this bookshop from Cape Town, South Africa is on the telephone. And the lady who owns it said, "Isn't our credit any good?" I don't know anything about your credit. What's wrong? I want 200 copies of each title, and I'm getting 20 titles. That's insulting. Well, I said, tell me what you could possibly do with 200 copies of each title. We said, we have 800 people here lined up for classes in Johannesburg and Cape Town and Durban. 800. Yes, and that's what was waiting there, too. 800 people greeted me in South Africa. I not only went that term, I went back the very next year again, because the work had grown so tremendous. Could a man do that? No. But could you believe anyone but me if they told it to you? Doesn't it really sound stretching it a little bit too far? But it's gospel truth. It's in the records. It's gospel truth. So it is that I don't believe that there's a man or woman who could have carried the infinite way around in 14 years and brought about its acceptance in as many places to quite the extent, or who could have, as an unknown, never before having written a book, corralled such publishers as Harper and Brothers in New York, or George Allen and Unwin in London, or the publishers that we have in Holland and in Germany and now in Japan. I don't believe a man could do that, and I don't think you would want to undertake it, unless you had behind you the divine grace that has operated with me and for me and through me ever since my career began 30 years ago, that has led me through experiences that are certainly as great as those we read about in Scripture. If I haven't walked on the water literally, I have figuratively and symbolically. And if I haven't had manna fall from the sky, I've certainly had $1,000 bills fall from there that weren't due me or owed me by anybody that has worked the miracles in this business. And so, I say to you, please accept anything as a miracle as long as you don't credit it to a man or a woman. Because there doesn't live a man or woman who can perform spiritual miracles. But those who attain the tiniest measure of spiritual grace find this grace operating through them to heal people, to supply people, to care for people, to bring about changed attitudes, and to do all other kinds of miracles. Well, we've been entirely on the subject of miracles all night, and I hope that those who hear this tape or this lesson will find something in them except just testimonies, so as to know that they're not meant as testimonies. They are actual experiences bearing witness to the powers of a transcendental consciousness which are impersonal and universal and can be attained by those who are not seeking loaves and fishes, but are seeking the attainment of that consciousness. Would you please enlighten me on the Master's words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And I would actually interpret that as meaning the humble. The poor in spirit are those who have no spirit of self, no spirit of self-power, self-wisdom, those who actually know that there is a presence in man. There is the Spirit of God in man. There is the Father within me who doeth the works. There is the poor in spirit, for they say like the Master, not only I can of my own self do nothing, or I am nothing and my message is not mine, but they also say I am not healthy and I'm not wealthy. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and by virtue of my sonship, all that the Father hath is mine. There is a poorness of spirit, a humility. There is an absence of personal selfhood, an absence of personal power, and the complete relaxedness in the awareness of a divine grace. Oh, that's all right. You see, there is something called I. And perhaps you have wondered why the word I is capitalized in the English language. I think it's the only word that's capitalized, isn't it? Except words that apply to deity. Why is it capitalized? Because it does apply to deity. I is the name and the nature of my selfhood, your selfhood, the one selfhood, because I and my Father are one, not two. So there can't be two I's. If I and the Father are one, there is only one I, and I am that I. I am that I am. And in proportion to our awareness of that, we demonstrate the fact that we have nothing to demonstrate. We are the embodiment of all that God is and all that God has. For I and the Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. And therefore we relax from physical might or mental power and let there be light. Don't try to create it. Let there be light. Approach your own individual life as if you were watching a sunset or a sunrise, and not projecting yourself out there trying to make it happen, but abiding in the center of your being, and let there be sunrise. Let there be sunset. Not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. By the grace of God, the sun rises and the sun sets and the tides go in and the tides go out. Sit by the ocean and watch those tides coming in and going out, and realize that you are making no effort to bring it about. Notice the stars and the planets at night, and realize you are doing nothing, nor is collective man doing anything. It is a state of ising, a state of being. And behind this state of being must be the infinite, eternal, immortal, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. No, it isn't. It is omnipresence itself. It is omnipotence itself. It is omnipresence, omniscience, omnipotence itself. It is not an omnipotent something, but it is omnipotence itself.